recording already.
Okay, I'd like to introduce Mark Kramer and also Paul Good. They are going to talk to us about Sketching Matters. Paul is an information architect, and Mark is a business strategist with user experience design, and they've got a lot to say, so I'm going to let them take over.
And we're going to break this into two pieces. Mark is on the bill, but we do this together. So my part is, I'm a failed artist, former art student, and my part's all over the place. But it's pretty and illustrative and whatnot. But then Mark's piece is more like coming from a business foundation and a new to sketching. And the whole idea is that as I show you stuff that seems like it's really corny with a bunch of different people and stick figures and stuff, the whole idea is that it's about the attitude of sketching. The attitude of getting to the thing that you need to do, getting to a decision faster, and not getting stuck with document debt and stuff like that. So this is me. Pretty good rendition. This is my family. This is where I was all day today because I couldn't take off from this, but I got 2 4-year-olds and a 2-year-old and a small dog that gets no attention and no love. I came here from Richmond 6 years ago to DFW. I love DFW, but if anybody is from Richmond and want to talk about it, let me know. Richmond is near and dear, big history there. I am an information architect at a company called Calcomite. You want to know about it? Okay, we're nearby. It's hunting and fishing. We help agencies that do that kind of stuff, hunting and boating, and we make web apps and stuff for them. I'm, again, art school. These were the tools of my trade, which were paintbrushes and micron pens. Anybody know what micron pen is? It's the right thing to do. In art school, we had these things called critiques, where you go into a whitewash room, you bring in the thing you've been doing for 6 weeks, and someone always would bring in something that they made the night before, and you'd have to have a valuable conversation about it, right? And the professors, if they were really good, they'd try to steer you from tackling the person and trying to beat them up senseless, because you know that you spent $500 on your piece, and they just woke up and pulled something out of the dumpster and put it down. But they would kind of like, the thing goes, like, instead of attacking the person and attacking the lame piece of thing, you take yourself into this imaginary place where anything could be possible, and say that little brown turtle on the ground could be planet Earth. And what if, and these are typical things in a gallery setting, is that, or in an art school setting, you go, what if that was really big? And that's like, you want to kill that person too. But that's typically the thing you do. Like, if you bring in something big, someone will say, what if it fit in your hand? And you're like, I'll kill you. But that's art school. And so I traded that after kind of like getting out of art school a long time ago, coming back, like trying to teach myself Adobe products and saying I knew how to do JavaScript and XML, which are bold-faced lies. I basically gravitated back to these kinds of things, right? You see what they are, they're Office Max materials, right? And now I do the same thing. I draw a circle or a blob or something and I say, that's the Earth. And they go, that's the Earth, So that there's still that big gap that's being filled by people's imagination, but it's in a business context. And people that do this kind of stuff, that boldly stand up and just draw and like draw stupid stuff on the wall, it's really a hotly needed thing. So I encourage everyone to do that in groups where people are sitting with developers who are talking about data that needs to be transferred, and other people are talking about other things, and they think they're talking about the same thing, but they're not. So what I want to sell to you is that sketching matters. It's an attitude for stuff. You got to be bold. If you're like, someone really needs to bring clarity to this situation. You're sitting in another terrible meeting where everyone's sitting. Someone needs to stand up and use stuff and Post-its and whatnot. It's you, if you're thinking that. You have to have attitude, and you have to be bold enough to think that I can be fuzzy and just show what I'm thinking, get everyone to get it on the board, add some structure. It'll help you be really fast, and it'll help you be really accurate. And this is where I kind of stutter a little bit, but I did my Google Plusing out and asking people what they thought about sketching, and I got some really cool results, even though some people are critical of Google Plus. Joshua Kahn is from Best Buy, and he has these little quotes that you see in bold. Sketching provides a baseline for understanding. That's rock and roll. And then he kind of says, in short, the tangibility of sketches gets the group more quickly and accurately to the thing. I couldn't have agree with him more. And just a little side comment, I talked to him more. he said that when he has to go to do big VP meetings and stuff to sell them on what they're doing or give them updates or whatever, they roll in a big whiteboard and they do it right there. And the VP sits there and makes his assessment, and I suggest that. This is Abby Jones. She's from Google. She said she works with developers and she sketches it all out, and like just because she can sketch and show, she can be course corrected by the developers, you know. And when you're sketching, you kind of take an attitude of like, ideas are just ideas, let's get them right, not like my idea is so awesome. So sketching is an attitude of being flexible with developers. And this is Edward Cossette. He works with me at Calcomai. I liked his, I put him in there because he talked about this deer hunting game that they developed before I got there, but it was essentially a flash game. And it all came from a concept of this little interface that was a little sketch. It had a little meter at the bottom and a box. And he was able to take that idea to a Flash developer and to an education smarty guy and develop a game. And it's a really neat game. So 3 big ideas. Sketching helps you communicate with your So a lot of this is just going to be stuff that I do, stuff that I've done. And it's been kind of weird because I'll do it and I'll show it to the client and they're like, great, oh, wow, I can do this, you know? And a side comment, I worked with a guy named T. Scott. You might know T. Scott. I was really annoyed when I first started working with T. Scott because I'm like, what do I do? What's a tried and true process to doing this information architecture stuff? And he's like, you know, this is all the stuff that you start learning. So there's all these different little things that you start learning to practice just to please the client. So this is about an education thing. And the big idea is that I had to work in this idea around education, and I started teaching myself all the objects like around education. So if you are sketching, and this is a visual thing, and let's say if you're in the education field, right? You work with kids. If you want to get into the sketching thing of sketching and drawing objects, all you have to learn is to do geometric shapes and make them the things that are of that environment, like books, paper, chalkboards, pieces of chalk, pens and paper. And if you go up and draw them on the board and start talking to people about their industry, so you can change this into any industry you want, they start loving you and trusting you, right? So this was for, you know, just stuff. And then you can start putting these things into stories with these little sketchy people, you know? That's a guy. He's not happy. You see him? I don't want to get into him, right? He's the one who's excited, right? And that's a computer, right? We can talk about that. And so you can start taking these things that you've learned to draw that are just essentially boxes and little scratchy people and have them in real life situations, right? So you take it even more, like, oh, they're having conversations, they're videotaping and playing football, and this guy's in the lab. You know, this stuff is not using any kind of like big art degree, you know? It's just capturing what needs to be captured. So keep going. So then just for this example, I took this into other kind of avenues of like putting it in Illustrator or whatever and just kind of like quickly throwing it into something. And a lot of, like this is a big thing you can do with sketching and this Illustrative style. You can, it's like a consulting thing. You talk about a problem that the client has, you make it sound really, really bad, you know, like the world's gonna end, and then you show them your product, and then they go, oh, yeah, that does seem like some good stuff. So this is the life of a student. Throughout K through 12, they have all this digital stuff. What are they gonna do? And then they don't really care. They go off to college to drink, and then they leave all that stuff behind. But in fact, after you go to college, it would be nice to reflect upon all that material that actually when you grow up. So beyond this solution and all this metadata, and this is bound, like I'll go back to it, but it's like it was fuzzy, and then you add some structure to it, showing that you understand. So I'm gonna go through this stuff that I did just to keep showing I understand something. I had to go talk to someone about this SharePoint thing that they needed to organize people around stuff. And this was for city officials or whatever. And so I just started drawing people that I knew worked in the city and what their problems might be. This is for scientists. I don't know anything about scientists, but they're in a lab, they have notebooks. Okay, lab coats and notebooks. This was something like, this side is like whiteboard stuff, so you have these conversations with whiteboard stuff, and then you can go into like whatever program you feel comfortable with and make something that's tighter and show it to them, and they think, oh yeah, that's exactly what we talked about. So different ways. And this was another thing, this was like this guy came to me and said, I really want you to make these diagrams about this inventory process that we have at the company. And I'm like, hold on, because that sounds like 3 weeks of work. Whatever you're talking about is crazy, right? So I sat down with him at a lunch table, and I said, what are we talking about? And I just put it on the little notes and stuff. I stuck it on a whiteboard, and we moved it all around and drew where things go. So the big idea is that there are objects, there's people and stuff, and they go from one place to another, and you can map out this inventory system. Is that good? He's like, yeah, it's perfect. Great. So by sketching and having the attitude of like, this might just work, you save yourself like staying up till 11 with Visio, which is the right? Oh, how do I do that? Like this.
How about let's
Okay, all right. Oh, Girl Scouts, right? This was a fun one. We tried to sell them at SharePoint, probably, right? So, I hate SharePoint, I don't want to do it, right? But I will, if job market is necessary. But I really like thinking about the people and their problems and what they might do with it, right? So I kind of like broke up all the different people, and I kind of did a little bit of research, you know, finding out what they might need, you know, and kind of imagining it. And that was a lot of fun for me. And then even, this is called scamping in Britain. You may know scamping. Okay, this is scamping, which is just like doing something that's inky and kind of like rough, but just enough detail to have a conversation about it. So this, to me, is much better than sitting in balsamic or anything, you know, although I love balsamic. And this is my, I think one of the final really cool things around fuzzy to structured. My wife, we had this room, she's like, I want to have an office, and she kept hitting on my case, like, let's have an office in there, let's have an office in there. You never help. And so, I know about my study IT, right? You, it's probably a game, but you tell me what I need, and I'll just go in there and get it in 2 seconds flat. But she's like, I think we could just buy stuff from IKEA and use it in the office. I'm like, yeah. So I just kind of like drew IKEA stuff in a room. It's 2 weeks, or it means it takes 3 days. He needs it in 3 days, right? So I stayed in the room, took a picture, I redrew it, right? With corny little guy. Like, I really wish this was really cool, like Hunter Man, you know, but it's just this corny dude. He's got a phone, he's got a bunch of paper, you know, you see the different points that the guy wants to make. I drew the different bodies of people that he has to manage, you know, there's always people involved, user experience folks. And then I said, that was the pain, now this is the gain. And you don't know this, but hunters go out and they get up in a tree and shoot critters. So this guy, with our app, it's almost as if he's up in a tree shooting critters. And these are all the ways that you win with our app, you know? I took pictures of the thing, vectorized it, put it into whatever programs Adobe has, colorized them, right? And everything, did you see, anyone see Aaron Hirschman's presentation? Right? Anybody see that?
Yes, sir.
At this point, you're looking at Dribbble. You're going, man, that stuff on Dribbble is so hot. I want to stop now. But you don't. Just keep going. You say it's good enough. It's corny, but it's good enough. I don't want the owner to be going out showing this kind of corny stuff to these hunters. It's good enough. I just kind of drop this into all these different objects, right? It's just the things into PowerPoint-ish, whatever stuff, and then I can start telling the story. The illustrations are just good enough. I have to get rid of my artist and say it's just good enough. It's just good enough. Give it. Make sure all the text is there that he can edit it while he's out on the road and whatever. And I go home at 5. Be bold and sketch. This is another thing where there was a room, there was a situation in where the room was completely covered with whiteboards, right? And we're in this really high pressure, the most high pressure conversation I've ever been with Microsoft and some other huge entity, and they were talking, and it was going bad. It was going real bad. And the guy just starts talking about how they do what they do. You know, all that valuable stuff, you're like, how did they see they did that? Because I need to go make that. You know, this industry specific, this one guy that knew everything started talking. And I jumped up and I just started drawing. And this is like all the way around the room 3 times. And the whole conversation turned from like this pain thing of like, I don't trust you, to like, remember what you were talking about before in the process? And they start pointing to the wall, and the whole conversation changes to standing up and pointing to things and having something to reference to. Awesome, right? So you've got to get up and draw. And Mark's going to go into this thing, which is more like, you don't have to draw
funny people, which is, it's a great thing to do, right? But you can just draw words and connect them to other words. So, show progress. All right, I'm done. These are all just stuff, balsamic stuff, whatever. It's done.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So, hi, I'm Mark. How many of y'all are really inspired now to go draw? Awesome. How many of y'all are scared to death thinking, how in the world do I do stuff like that? Right, that's me, because I'm surrounded, I'm really a consultant. I'm really a business guy. And I'm surrounded by all these super talented people that have been to art school or are just naturally gifted and they do all this stuff and it looks amazing. And then I feel like a 3-year-old up there. And I think part of the point is we need to be more like 3-year-olds, feel less intimidated, and realize that there are a ton of benefits when we get up and draw things. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in case you are feeling intimidated about it. So that's me. I do the Twitter thing. So like Dan Rohn says in this long-winded quote, basically he figured out, he's a consultant too, and now he draws for a living. And he said he figured out that the job of a consultant really is to kind of listen and figure out, hear this client's problem, and then all of a sudden be expected to start solving it on the fly. And that can be difficult and intimidating to do, but everybody has a problem when they're hiring somebody outside to solve something, and he says any problem can be made clearer with a picture, and that picture can be made using the same simple set of tools. So I don't have time to go through the entire book, but I'm going to narrow that tool set down to very concise 5 pro tips that anybody can use to have much more confidence about their sketching if they aren't already. And even if you are already confident, this is a great way to teach others around you that aren't, like maybe your clients or maybe your coworkers. So hopefully it'll be helpful for everybody. Okay, here are the 5 quick tips that we have time to go through today. Titling your sketch, combining simple shapes to make more complex ones, expressing emotion or state is really big, labeling your nouns, and arrows demonstrate relationships. All right, thanks. Do you have any questions? Oh, no, wait, all right, I've got some details there. Okay, so the first pro tip is before you start making any marks on the board is to write a title up on your blank page, okay? Write the date, and that's a great way to kind of take a breath before you start doing anything and define your domain or define your problem space. And that kind of gets everybody focused and bullshit on what is it that we're talking about. And it's a great way to overcome that fear of a blank page. Right? There's nothing scarier than a blank screen or a blank sheet of paper, especially when there's a room full of people watching you. All right, so that's the first tip. The second one is to just, you can make some very, very visible things or very recognizable things by using very simple shapes. So I grew up in the 70s. Marcelo pointed that out yesterday, all the 35-year-old old people. Does anybody else remember Ed Emberley? Did y'all have those Ed Emberleys? Those were awesome, right? Yeah. And you could, he would show you how just using circles and lines and dots and half circles and squiggles and things, you could make a whole universe or demonstrate all of creation around you, basically. And so we can do that today, even though we're not 5 or 7-year-olds, right? We can do that in the boardroom or in the project room or at the lunch table. Love that. That's cool. So practice that. You can practice the shapes that are in your space if you're always working in the same industry or you're starting with a new client. Pick up what the shapes or the objects that they're using and practice some of those. Then you'll get that down and you'll be able to not have to think about it and just draw it quickly. So here's an example we did for AT&T. And you can see we've got a lot of different kinds of characters and people, and it doesn't look anywhere near as cool as Paul's thing, but it is recognizable, right? Because there's things that get used over and over again, like little videos and people and places and databases and very simple shapes that they don't have to be perfect. It just has to be enough to convey information. And that making that connection with somebody is a big, big way to making sure that we're all getting understanding. All right, some more from the same project. Okay, Paul talked about big deal in consulting is solution selling, right? You talk about the problem and you make the problem earth-shattering, you know, in a life-and-death situation, and you make it as difficult as possible. And then you talk about, well, what's the solution? What's the opposite of that? How do we make things better for everybody, for your customers, for your clients, for yourself? So one way to do that is to express emotion and express action and things like that. And again, a few very simple shapes drawn in different ways can go a very, very long way. Ed Emberley again, remember? He's awesome. Here we have just a circle, but you can see, depending on the way that you draw the eyebrows or the mouth, we get all these different combinations that show how different the scale of emotion. And the same with the stick figure. You can see how many different actions we can portray, really by using the exact same set of shapes. And we can all do that, right? Triangles and lines connected with dots. So here's an example of that kind of stuff where I had to speed teach a Sunday school class of 5th, 6th, and 7th graders, basically, the Prince of Egypt movie. And so, you know, we've got baby Moses, and he's happy, and we have him burning bush, and so he's down prostrate, you know, worshiping, and then the Egyptians are dead over here with the X's over their eyes, you know, and then here's Moses like raising his staff. And that's like really childish, and it was really quick, but it got the idea across. The kids could all then relate to, yeah, I've heard this story before, now I see how it goes through, and we can talk about all the other things about it. And it was a great way to connect with the kids, instead of some boring old guy, you know, telling them stories they've already heard 1,000 times. All right, so the easiest way, here's the real secret, to make your drawings recognizable is to label them, right? Then there's no room for interpretation. It's still awesome at Emberley, right? And that's one reason why these all work. But seriously, some people learn visually, and some people learn audibly. And when you write the word under the object, you've named it, you've defined it, and some people see it, you know, with their eye. And then people that learn with their ears will read it, and then they'll hear it as well. So you're accommodating a wide range, you know, of folks that don't know how they learn. So again, one of the reasons why you might have recognized some of these shapes that otherwise would be abstract or squiggly without labels is because I labeled them. This is the data steward. See this guy that's wearing the turtleneck and the spiky hair, that's creative services. Right? So you can have fun with it too. And you know, that's not funny by itself, but then when you put the label under it, then it starts to make sense. Okay, so one of the reasons why we sketch is to get our arms around the problem, as we said before, like Dan's quote, right? You come in and you're expected to drink from a fire hose, and all of a sudden learn this client's space and all the things that go around it. And what we're trying to do is go from the fuzzy to something more organized or more structured so that we can kind of see what's going on. And there's a lot of cool ways to do that. One is mind mapping. Does anybody mind map in here? There's like Freenode, cool, and MindNode. And you know, at first I'm like, oh, that's kind of touchy-feely, hippie, trippy, artsy-fartsy, I don't know about it. And then when I just let go and embraced it, I realized, whoa, this is a great way to just get your arms around something to begin with. So in this case, we were doing personas for a very large insurance company, and we wanted to make sure they had a very, very wide, diverse group of employees. And by the way, that should say employees. I don't want to call my users, but anyways. So then we just started talking about what are all the different kinds of attributes that an employee would have. And then of that type of attribute, what are all the different values? And some of them even have subcategories and stuff. And so doing this was a good way for us to brainstorm and kind of quickly go out there. I like MindNode if you use a Mac because it's very Mac-like. Freenode is great, it works across platforms. They both use the same file format, which is cool and easy to share. But another way to get meaning by sketching without actually having to use pictures is just to list your nouns and then connect them with an arrow as a verb. And it's amazing how quickly you can come up with something that is very meaningful to to help define a space. So here's what I'm talking about. We've got a noun, we have another noun, and then I'm going to connect them with a verb. And that allows somebody who has not seen this before to, if I just share that simple rule, then they could just start looking at this picture and see and reading what they're seeing, and without them even knowing it, they're going to sound like an expert to somebody else that hasn't heard this before. So here's an example. I have a noun of a UX enthusiast, and then I have another noun, big design, 2012, and I can connect that with a verb, right? So the enthusiast attends the conference. And wow, I just, said a fact about the space that I didn't know anything about before. So this is what that looks like when we do it on a whiteboard. This is for a law firm. Somebody complained about working for law firms yesterday, and I had my hand raised. And we had to figure out how do we define all this stuff. Thank you. And so we started writing down all the nouns and all the relationships, and then these arrows between them. And when the partners and the walked in, and we kind of described what was happening, they started looking and reading, and they were like, wow, you did this morning in your first meeting? And we said, yeah, that's what we're talking about. And so it was very collaborative and a great way to get the entire room involved, because then everybody can follow this. Afterwards then, we cleaned it up. Maybe we didn't. Okay, that's it, actually, right? So we had to go into Visio. So that's the exact same thing, just after we had a chance to kind of clean it up and make it part of our design document. All right. Yeah.
That one technique, maybe not on a whiteboard, but also on a big, if you're interviewing someone, just kind of like try to get all the information out, and you have someone else there just mind mapping it, it's really awesome. Because if you're able to get capture over the space.
Yeah, that's another good pro tip, is to work in pairs. It's really hard to moderate and organize the room when your back is to everybody, right? I mean, you can do it, but you have to speak really loudly, and you have to constantly keep turning around, to make eye contact with people that you're talking to. Okay, we're going to skip the video clip, but the whole point here is kind of like what Stephen was talking about yesterday about learning contextually. When we prototype, we can get the experience and put ourselves in the situation and problem solve by taking one step further away from being abstract and kind of getting more to the reality of the situation without spending the resources that are required to actually get there. Sketching is a great way to do that. Prototyping through sketching swaps detail for speed. Through sketching, that affords us lots of early failures, which is another theme I've heard in several. Fail early and often, right? That's much less expensive than failing late. Sketching lets us do that. So here's a quick example where we were, like this word that Paul and I learned when we were working with British people, scamping. It feels like wireframing and it's sketching, but they tell us that it's not, it's something in between. So here's an example where we listed all the features that we needed on sticky notes. Somebody said, it's gotta do this, gotta do this. We wrote all this in stickies, and then when we started sketching, we put our sticky up by the thing. And then when all of our stickies were gone from the list and on the screen, we knew we were done. And then we could look at it and figure out if it worked or not. And so we did different elements, a few more details, and eventually that ended up in the app that they ended up using. But we got to go through all sorts of iterations and design ideas very early, very inexpensively, and very quickly, before we started messing around with code. Because the developers are a lot more expensive than us. So here's where we did sketching for an entire list of pages, again, showing the relationships between them. Not worrying about making it pretty, making a nice sitemap. We just started drawing pages wherever we were talking about and wherever we were, and then showing how they connected. And here we're even able to separate, hey, these are needed for the first deadline, and then we can do all this other stuff later. And again, you see the sticky notes for all the different things that we wanted to make sure that we were covering. And that's what the final site looked like. This was actually for Microsoft and SharePoint. They loved the process. This is why I have this in here. This was for Microsoft IT. They got so excited about just the style, the collaboration, and how talented this was T. Scott again, but they wanted to adopt that visual style for the site itself. So that's what the final theme and skin looked like. And it fit because it was all about their skunkworks kind of project. All right, so I'm going to skip the surface thing. That's a fun story, but I'd rather get to your questions. So again, here are those 5 tips again. And so if you didn't take anything else or only was intimidated by Paul's amazing talent, write down these 5 things, and if you're already talented, share them with your friends, your coworkers, or your clients about titling your sketch, the first thing that you do. Combining simple shapes. Don't get overwhelmed with trying to create the Mona Lisa or an Escher or something like that, right? Think simple. Label those, express the emotion or state, showing the difference from before and after, and really emphasizing that and leaning on it, amplifying it. Label your nouns, and then demonstrate those relationships with arrows. And it's amazing how quickly you can get a group of people all together with the same understanding in the same space. You can see that here. Paul showed you how he created this diagram before, and it uses all 5 of those tips, which is kind of cool to see all that in action. So awesome. Where do I go with this next? We'll get to questions real quick in a second. There's some great books out there. I've already talked about Dan Roan. Thank you. And this book is like a mini MBA, as far as it looks like it's about drawing, but it's really about logical thinking and logical problem solving. And he's got all these great tools to show you how to get your arms around a problem and then be able to work through it to come up with an idea that works. I know the book's in the bookstore. We might have one to give away later, and it's really good.
That's the squid.
That's the squid, yeah. So we'll talk about that in a second. Dave Gray's got a great video on his website about how to use forms, fields, and flow. Again, simple shapes to get to really complex ideas. David Sibel's book on visual meetings is really good with some game storming ideas and things. And then game storming itself. I don't know if anybody went to the session yesterday. We've done game storming at his thing. We'll talk a little bit about that. It's good. There's a lot of people on the Twitters that talk about visual thinking, either through that hashtag or there's different people. But if you simply subscribe to Viz Think Dallas, you'll see that we're retweeting a lot of those as well. So you can go to one place to get a source for all sorts of neat lo-fi ways for solving problems, selling ideas. Okay, so now is my feel-good moment. Well, I think one of the biggest ideas about sketching and prototyping and collaborating in a group is this idea that even when only one person is up on the board, when they're listening and getting feedback from the people in the room, there's a sense of collaboration. And even when Paul or Keith Scott or somebody else was doing the drawings, everybody in the room would walk out with great posture and their shoulders back and smiles on their faces because they felt like, hey, you just drew something that was really cool that describes what I do. And we did that together. And so the whole idea is that the collaboration required to do one of these kind of big exercises in a room and to not be afraid and to step up and own it from a picture standpoint, all of that develops the kind of relationships up front and early. They're fun. They help us to feel each other out from a social kind of standpoint and get comfortable with each other so that later on in the project, when conflicts are sure to arise, when we are going to have to make tough decisions about trade-offs of increasing scope or budget or time or whatever it is, the relationships that we've created up here up front are going to help us to get through this rough spots much easier later on in the project. Hopefully that makes sense. We talk about this stuff a lot. Once a month, every third Thursday at Viz Think Dallas. It's a group. There's usually, anywhere from 7 to 15 of us. We'll go through some different exercises to help work on our visual skills so that when we step up to the whiteboard, we've already had some practice with some of these things so we don't have to figure it out each time. And it's a wide range of folks. There's art school people and there's not art school people. and we all draw together and have a good time, and all the materials are there, and it's a lot of fun. So if you go to visithinkdallas.com, you can get all the details as far as time and location. Our next meeting is going to be June 21st. And please RSVP there as well. There's a little email or contact form, and that helps us to know what kind of food and supplies that we need to bring. So that was really quick because we wanted to get to questions. And so with that, we come up here too, so we can field some questions. We have some time left? We have 5 minutes, okay. So who has a question?
Is there a cost to that?
No, it is free.
Okay,
Yeah, absolutely.
good to know.
It is. Hi.
Hi, do you have sessions with clients remotely, or is this, they all have to be in the room at the same time? I mean, I know that ideally it'd be good to have them in the same room, but a lot of clients nowadays are in different places.
I would love to hear if anybody else has done that successfully,
Right.
because it would be great. Yes, Brenda?
I mean, in some of the virtual classrooms, like Adobe has Adobe Connect, there are whiteboards. I could see you doing that online on a whiteboard, you know, like this kind
I mean, it still wouldn't establish like the,
of. Well, we do have audio too. I mean,
yeah,
it's surprising how much you can connect to people. As a matter of fact, sometimes I think it's a little less intimidating. They don't have a person staring at them in front of them. And you can have several people in the classroom at the same time.
right.
I mean, I know there's other things besides Adobe Connect, but that's the one I'm familiar with.
If I could comment to that.
Sure.
People buy my books at the bookstore, and so we do this distance training for the U.S. Navy, because they want a warranty on a $50 book, apparently. The problem we ran into is we've done that, and I bought a great deal of broadcast equipment to do it right. But the problem that you have is asking the question if you want to collaborate, because when we do online training, we have a very special system. You don't watch me, I get to see you. So I have to have a technician with me to produce it, and we get to see 9 people at a time and what's on their desk, so we can see if there's a distraction or participate or pass the pen. So the other ones are something that we found distances the other people because it's too passive to them. And when we turned on the cameras, we didn't tell them. It didn't matter if it's an insight or, you know, whoever. We found that they weren't paying attention to it. And so the problem that came out of it was they said, well, the government has these great conference centers. So we tried the conference center thing. And we found that everyone was distracted once again. So when they're in the room and you're standing in their face, you can pick on them and make sure they participate. And so I totally agree with his point. If you don't get that collaboration up front, you don't resolve the gap of the viewpoint.
Yeah. Yeah, there's much less room for interpretation here, right, than reading an entire sentence. Jason Fried has a great quote: "There's nothing functional about a functional spec," right? And this is much more functional than trying to interpret a paragraph. So, hey, Aaron.
So your first pro tip,
Yes.
you ever find yourself struggling with just even putting a title on something? Because sometimes I'm walking into, we don't know what we're talking
Yes, and okay, so awesome point. I'm glad you brought that up. It's like I don't want to commit. Well, at least we know what the problem is, so we can at least write a question, even if we don't know what the answer is, and then we can go back and change it. You know, once we know the answer. Are we over on time? 2 minutes, great. Who else has a question? Yes.
Have you ever tried whiteboard animation, like RSA Animate Series?
No. What's that?
So they take a video camera, and as they're drawing on the whiteboard in real time, there's a voiceover explaining what's going on. And so at the very end.
Oh, yes, I have seen those.
Yeah,
Yes, those are
right.
very cool. And question, it's really, they're like really well
There's a
produced.
lot of interaction, like you did with the client, right? I've seen people in Google Hangouts, webcam, and like one of those big,
Yeah.
big pieces of paper that you just dribble, like that kind of like. And then the other thing is Autodesk Sketchbook Pro with its little tool set, somehow getting some little screen cap program. But that program is very nice for drawing. Dave Gray's used that.
Yeah,
So
but no,
Sketchbook Pro.
that RSA
Yeah, the
series.
RSA thing is.
Yeah, and that's kind of like what Paul showed with the Girl Scout example, and then like what happened at Microsoft too, where we hadn't even, who was in the content discussion in here at 10 o'clock this morning? Where Hello was talking about, or Rael was talking about doing content right before you did design. We were doing content before we were doing design up on the whiteboard. And the group got so excited about the visual style, they said, yeah, we want it to be like a sketch looking. We want it because it feels organic and it feels accessible, and that's what we're going for, and it was cool. So it was funny how it developed the relationship and the problem was facing farther than we realized it was going to. Do we have time for one more question? Oh, we don't. But there's no one after us, but I know you want to go hear Jared too. So if you were sketching, if you did any sketches while we were talking, come on down because we'd love to see them and hear about them, and we've got stuff to share with you.